Finally, today, a conversation about the new geography of innovation. So please welcome to the stage Steve Case, Chairman and CEO of Revolution and co-founder of AOL, and here to interview him again, Steve Clemons.
Steve, thank you for being here. Let's do a generational test. How many of you remember America Online? Yay! You never know how that's going to go because, America Online, of course, brought us all into the internet. And one of the real privileges I've had is getting to know Steve Case and traveling with him on that big blue bus. It was actually Mike Huckabee's old campaign bus. I told him it was an awful experience, except when we got off the bus, then it was fun with you. Steve is one of America's most iconic entrepreneurs. Of course, he is the author of The Third Wave, An Entrepreneur's Vision of the Future. Steve, let's just start out in Des Moines. I came to Des Moines with you. I missed Des Moines, and this is why, in part, the Atlantic put the Heartland Summit and said, we're going to go back to Des Moines. I loved it here. I loved the startup crawl that we went on. And I guess one would look at what you're doing with the Rise of the Rest and saying it's such an inefficient thing to do because all of the zinger thoughts and all of the talent and all of the money and all of the things are, neatly and easily packed in San Francisco and the Bay Area. So tell those critics why they're wrong.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here and great to be back in Des Moines. I'm here in part because I'm grateful that Steve and the Atlantic team decided to come back and host this Heartland Summit. And it's been the parts I've heard, it's been a great morning. It kind of ties in with, to your question, ties in with both of the themes you started with. The first was the early days of the AOL and the internet, and then more recently we're trying to do with the Rise of the Rest. Where there is skepticism about when we talk about startups in the middle of the country. There are people I know, I have great respect for, in places like Silicon Valley, that think all the smart people are in Silicon Valley, all the money's in Silicon Valley, most of the big breakout success has been in Silicon Valley, and that's going to continue to be the case. And they think the idea that there are going to be great, iconic startups, next Fortune 500 companies in places like Des Moines, they think it is a little crazy. But I take some comfort in the fact that when we got started with AOL 33 years ago, only 3% of people were online. Those 3% were on an average of 1 hour a week. And most people didn't think the internet ever would take off. Most people didn't understand why people I remember even people say do you really think that people are going to buy a personal computer and sit down at the keyboard and type a message to somebody when they can just pick up the phone and call them? That doesn't make any sense. I think it does. Yeah. And for a decade, they were right. For a decade, when we got started, it was not happening. It was slow. It was a struggle. We almost went out of business a couple times. Got some calls.
And you tell that story in The Third Wave.
Eventually, of course, the internet became a huge deal. Eventually, AOL took off, and at a peak, I think about half of all the internet traffic in the U.S. went through AOL. It ended up being a super valuable company. But for a decade, it seemed like a crazy idea and didn't make any sense to most people. So when I talk about regional entrepreneurship, I talk about what's happening in these cities. I talk about my belief that the next big iconic companies will not be just on the coast. They will be all across the country. I see the same skepticism in their eyes that I saw 35 years ago. But I know I'm right. I know that there are great entrepreneurs here. I know that in this third wave, the combination of technology, coding, machine learning, things like that with domain expertise, like here in Des Moines, actually understanding something about the insurance industry kind of helpful. And St. Louis kind of understanding something about farming is kind of helpful. Right. And Baltimore kind of understanding something about healthcare because of Hopkins and Under Armour is kind of helpful. Merging that is going to be what drives this next wave. And if we can successfully do that, and there are more breakout companies, what's going to start happening is we'll see less of the brain drain where people grow up here, including I'm sure some of your kids, left because there's greater opportunity elsewhere. You'll see fewer people leaving, and you'll start seeing a boomerang of people coming back, which will then fuel the next wave and the next wave, and suddenly a bunch of these cities will really rise up and surprise people.
Could you give the audience a snapshot of what you mean by the third wave and the sort of Toffler roots of that? Because we toss it around now as if it's an understood concept, but I'm not sure it is.
Well, first of all, Alvin Toffler wrote a book in 1979 called The Third Wave, which I read when I was in college, and I was completely taken with it. And that's part of the reason I decided, back then that I wanted to, really 40 years ago, kind of pursue this path of trying to help create the internet. His three waves were the agriculture revolution, which was then followed by the Industrial Revolution, and he was predicting the technology revolution, the digital revolution, things like the internet, which of course now we take for granted, but 40 years ago seemed kind of futuristic, and kind of people were, as I said, were somewhat skeptical. When I wrote the book, The Third Wave, I was talking about the three waves of the internet, and the first wave was getting everybody online, getting America online. The second wave was building software apps on top of the internet. And the third wave was integrating, or will be integrating, the internet in much more seamless ways and transforming really important aspects of our lives, how we stay healthy, how we move around cities, what we eat, even that concept of smart cities, pretty important stuff that changed a little bit in the first wave, changed a little bit more in the second wave, will change a lot, I think, in the third wave. But it's going to require this different mindset. It's going to require more partnerships. The second wave was about apps. Facebook, power to them. They wrote some software in a dorm room, launched it, boom, took off like, virally, and suddenly it was a global phenomenon. They didn't need any partnerships. They just had a cool app. And that was common with a lot of the second wave companies, Snapchat, other things, where Google even was essentially about software. In the third wave, you're going to need partnerships. In healthcare, it's not about the app. It's actually getting nurses and doctors to embrace it, and hospitals to integrate it, and health plans to pay for it, and governments to allow it, and it's complicated. And that partnership mentality is going to be critically important. Policy is also going to be critically important. Most of these sectors we're talking about in the third wave are regulated. And people may complain about regulations. I sometimes complain about the regulations. But there is a reason there are regulations like around drug safety and food safety and making sure the planes you get on, there's a reasonable chance you're going to land safely. And so there is a reasonable likelihood in the third wave that the drones in the sky, there's going to be some regulations about drones, some regulations about driverless cars. It's not going to be kind of everybody just do whatever they want. It's going to have some policy implications. Again, that was not important in the second wave. It's going to be important in the third wave. And finally, it's perseverance. I think it's going to be, these are hard problems to solve. They're going to be kind of like AOL was, kind of 10-year in the making overnight successes. And that's what we saw in the first wave. Partnerships was critical. Policy was critical. Perseverance was critical. They were not that critical in the second wave. I think they'll be critical again in the third wave. And this ties in with this rise of the rest, because I think the skill set, the mindset of many of the entrepreneurs in many parts of the country, including here in Des Moines, lends itself to that collaboration, that in building relationships and trust, and taking a long-term view that is going to be so key around partnerships. There tends to be more of a respect for, maybe there's some people in Silicon Valley they don't believe there should be any government. It's kind of like a hyper-libertarian kind of thing. I'm sure there's people here frustrated about stupid things the government does, but most people are going to say there probably is some role for government, and in this third wave, kind of want somebody to make sure.
Didn't know you were going to get so political.
I think getting political is going to become critically important for this next wave of innovation.
Right.
People don't like it, but I think it's true. So I really believe that this third wave is starting to build. And the kind of companies that are being created now are different than the kind of companies that were being created 10 years ago. That will accelerate. And I believe the rest is rising. These cities are rising. You see it in the East Village here, and many other parts of the country we've been around. There's something happening, as you've heard from the different mayors. What's happening at the local level is really quite encouraging. The things that are innovation and so forth are happening at that kind of local level. And so I think the rest will rise. The third wave will break, and they will converge over the next decade. And both will accelerate, and it will be a game changer, I hope, in terms of how we think about innovation, but also a game changer in terms of having a more inclusive innovation economy where not just the money's invested, but also the jobs are being created in a few places and leaving a lot of people behind. That has to change, I think, in this third wave. As the rest rise, we will have a path to make that change.
We're going to do something fun in a minute, but I want Steve to give you a picture, a sort of sense of how the Rise of the Rest tour went. My little preamble to that, we've talked a little bit about a blue bus, and it would be full of people that were part of Steve's company and others, some journalists like myself. And we would go on startup crawls. We would go really into what was new in the city. I think what we did 5 or 6 years ago when we were in Des Moines. Right. So right near the beginning of this. So just in short form, tell us what that operation was like in city after city after city, and what is it today with this giant seed fund you have? And
well, it's evolved. When we first started this almost 5 years ago, it was really to shine a spotlight on entrepreneurs building companies and cities that are starting to show some signs of momentum and tell their stories to people around the country who really weren't paying attention. And part of the reason we, by you and others to join us on the last tour, we had 60 minutes, so hopefully they'll do something positive. Just trying to get the word out, the word out. And we invite venture capitalists from Silicon Valley and New York to join us, and they're always surprised. I had no idea. Like, we were in Chattanooga a couple months ago, and there's apparently Chattanooga is like the trucking capital in like Silicon Valley of trucking is Chattanooga. And so there's a company there that, doing a Bloomberg data platform for the trucking industry. Of course it makes more sense to be in Chattanooga than in Palo Alto or Manhattan because they have that expertise.
And you'd have pitches, you'd have people pitch?
Tell those stories, bring people together, try to get the university working more with the startups, the big companies, the mayors, kind of a mashup of people trying to convene and connect people. And as part of it, we do have a pitch competition because we want to highlight some of the interesting companies and shine a spotlight on them and help tell their stories. So we've now done that in 38 cities. I think it's like 10,000 miles we've traveled around. And each city is a little bit different, but what's consistent across all of them is they're on the move, they're on the rise, and you can feel it, you can see it. There's a sense of they have challenges. It is harder to raise capital for sure. It is harder to attract talent, particularly as you're scaling for sure. Sometimes it's harder to have the credibility in terms of the visibility, the positioning, the PR side of things to kind of get your story out. Sometimes it's harder to get meetings with partners that could be important. There are challenges. There's no question. But there's also a sense of something is happening. And just this morning, before I came over here, I had breakfast with 15 or so entrepreneurs, and basically we talked about what was the case a few years ago. We were here. How has it changed? And again, they outline a bunch of issues they're still dealing with and challenges they're struggling with. But there's a greater sense of optimism. One company, as you probably know here, Dwala, raised capital and was kind of forced to move its center of gravity to Silicon Valley by their Silicon Valley investor. They now pretty much shut down that operation and doubled down here in Des Moines. I think they have 50 people a year ago, 75 people now. They think it'll be over 100 by the end of the year. It's on the move, and it's a great example that while people thought they needed to move to Silicon Valley, because that's where all the smart people are. No, there's smart people everywhere. We just need to create opportunity everywhere.
And I understand that we have one of the winners of one of your competitions here today. From Omaha. So as I was thinking of this, because some of you may watch Shark Tank, I was sort of thinking that maybe Steve Case is sort of like Nemo Tank, like the friendly fish tank, because it really wasn't Shark Tank, but it was much nicer and kinder.
Dolphin Tank.
Yeah,
we were celebrating.
Even as there was a winner.
Helping tell their story.
Yeah, helping tell their stories. It was all very nice. It was all very kind of Midwest nice, right?
Yeah, so, Midwest nice, Iowa nice, no question.
Yeah, so no Mark Cuban.
And again, we do this. We have 8 or 10 companies in each city, and then local judges, and then we pick a winner. And our winner from Omaha. Right, is Amy Johnson, a company called Life Loop, and she identified a particular problem that, as we all get older, we'll be facing. Some of us may already be facing it with parents and loved ones. As they, how do you navigate that world? So we've asked her to give not a full pitch, because we give them more time in the pitch competition, but like a mini elevator pitch, less about this one company, but an example of the many kinds of companies we're seeing all across the country, not just in places like Silicon Valley. Amy.
Go for it, Amy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And this is definitely not a full pitch. It's really to tell the story of Life Loop. And so I co-founded Life Loop in 2015. And the story is really a personal story for our co-founding team. Us, like a lot of families in the U.S., had a personal experience of loved ones that were transitioning into senior living. And that was in nursing homes as well as independent living. And the one example with my husband's grandmother was really what kind of sparked the idea. And it was because we as families are very busy, life's crazy, and we wanted a way to connect. We wanted a way to know what she was doing every day. And we didn't really necessarily mean that from a clinical perspective. We wanted to know, is she happy? And what does that mean? That's a very different definition for everybody. So the journey really was for us to have a family app initially. So we wanted a way for our family to be able to communicate with staff, be able to understand if she was going to things or not going to things, more importantly. And so that's what really sparked the concept, and that concept became a much larger problem that we were trying to solve. So LifeLoop now is a full operational platform because we realized that we had to solve a bigger problem. And so that's what we've done. My team and myself, my co-founders have really spent the time to understand what the clients need, and then we've built that through partnerships. So today, LifeLoop does a lot of different things, which has been really cool to be a part of. I'm definitely not the only one doing it. I have a great team behind me. And so, just the reward of doing that has been worth it. It's been a lot of work, and it's support from people like Steve and other investors that really believe in you early on. That's pretty key. And one of the things for me is, building a company based out of Omaha. It's where I'm from. It's my community, and so sometimes you don't see it when you're in it, but how lucky you are. And for me, it's really been about the people. And, I have a lot of the values on the slide about the talent and the work ethic, but it's truly been about finding the right people and the funding. It's not an easy thing to start a company, and if you don't have the right team behind you, it's really difficult. And I think Omaha and places in the Midwest have that if you just trust those people. And so I've been really fortunate for a lot of reasons to have a company based in the Midwest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me just ask before you go away, I don't know if Steve has a question, but every year I go to Startup Grind, and they've got Startup Grind chapters around the country, but to the one in California, not to knock us out of the Midwest. But I always talk to these entrepreneurs and I say, look, what's the secret sauce? What's the thing that's most important? And I get a very different sets of answers. And I'm just, as you convey the most significant elements of why you think you're succeeding as things that others might replicate or learn from, that want to find their own entrepreneurial aspiration, what would those be?
I think probably the most obvious to me that we've done really well is really understanding the problem. We're kind of a funny co-founding team in the sense that none of us are from senior living and none of us are actually technical. And so it's kind of hilarious that we started a tech company in senior living, but I think that's why we've been successful, because we've had to truly understand the problem. And that's how we've built our whole product. You listen to your clients, you figure out if it's a problem across the whole industry, and then you implement those things. But then trusting your people that you've hired to do it the right way, I think has been something that has really helped us do the right things. It's not always comfortable. It's definitely got me out of my comfort zone. So it's a lot of trust, and it's a lot of truly understanding. And then we're in a market where there's a lot of education that still needs to happen. Right. And so really understanding and being a consultant to our clients has been a pretty key thing that's been apparent in what needs to happen in senior living.
Well, congratulations to Amy Johnson of LifeLoop. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Steve, how do I phrase this so I don't offend you?
Why don't you just not ask that? Why you figure out how to rephrase? I want to make a point about Amy. Hold on. About LifeLoop and also some data which I should have shared earlier but didn't, which is the reason this is so important. What we're collectively trying to do here is that the vast majority, some say all, of the net new jobs created in this country do not get created by small business or by big business. They get created by young, high-growth businesses, startups. Right. There's a lot of small business jobs for sure, right. But as a sector, some rise, some fall. A restaurant closes, a new restaurant opens, they end up employing about the same number of people. Fortune 500 company, obviously some are rising, but some are falling. So as a sector, it's about the same. So you want to create jobs in your community, you have to back startups, number one. Number two, last year, 75% of venture capital in this country went to 3 states. California, New York, Massachusetts, 75%. The other 47 states, 25%. Iowa, less than 1%. Pennsylvania, less than 1%. Ohio, less than 1%. Virginia, less than 1%. California alone, 50%. So what does that say? We're backing entrepreneurs in a few places that are creating jobs in those places. Sometimes their disruptions actually are destroying jobs in other places,
Right.
which it creates this dynamic where more and more people feel like there's a reason actually to be fearful of the future, anxious about the future, feels like it's bad for their family, bad for their community. So we need to level the playing field in terms of this capital flowing. But there's two other data points that are worse. Last year, over 90% of venture capital in this country went to men, less than 10% to women. So Amy is quite the exception. Last year, less than 1% went to African Americans. So that's the data. I would say this is still the most innovative entrepreneurship in the world. I'm proud of it. We all should be proud of it. But the data is pretty compelling. It does matter where you live. It does matter what you look like. It does matter who you know. Whether if you have an idea, you have a shot at the American dream. And so that's why this is not just about startup and Life Loop and senior living and so forth. Of course, that's an important specific company. It's about how do you back more entrepreneurs in more places doing with a more diverse backgrounds that are doing a more diverse mix of things, not just another like dating app, but helping people in fundamental aspects of their life. If we do that successfully, we should be able to have a more inclusive innovation economy where those people who are anxious now have a reason to be optimistic, and the people left have a reason to come back. And there really, it's much more of a and the last point I'll make, it goes back to your question about Toffler. And you know this, but because you lived it. The agricultural revolution took what was, remember, America itself 250 years ago was a startup. It was a startup. It was a pretty fragile startup that almost didn't make it. We led the way in the agricultural revolution in places like Iowa. We led the way with the industrial revolution in places like Pittsburgh and Detroit and many others. And then we led the way with the technology revolution. So we went from this fragile startup that almost didn't make it to the leading economy and the leader of the free world. The agricultural revolution was distributed around the country. The industrial revolution was distributed. Even the internet revolution. Recently, a lot of the actions in Silicon Valley. We started AOL in Northern Virginia. Right. Hayes, the modem company, was in Atlanta. Microsoft started in Albuquerque before moving to Seattle. Dell started in Austin. Gateway started in North Dakota. IBM's PC operations were in Boca Raton, Florida. I could give you an endless list of these things. It was regionally distributed. It's only the last 10 or 20 years, the second wave, when it's about apps, that Silicon Valley rose to such prominence, even dominance. In the third wave, there is an opportunity to kind of even things out again and kind of spread the capital, which also then increases the shots on goal, which increases the likelihood that some of the breakout companies of tomorrow are in places like Des Moines, not just in San Francisco.
See, Steve and I have spent enough time with each other that he basically answered the potentially offensive question that I was going to ask.
Yes.
And
good morning.
The question I was going to ask was, a lot of times discussions like this feels like philanthropy, or what you would do, and what you just described in terms of moving the needle so much on empowering entrepreneurship, looking at, I thought what you said is, young high growth companies is very different nomenclature. You have a different frame where you're both moving the needle in terms of a region revitalizes itself and looks at opportunities, but there is profit there. There are business, that investment makes sense. What you gave a picture of in terms about, the talent, so much talent being ignored, so much money going and coagulating in certain places, is that these are arbitrage, essentially opportunities. That talent's got to be spread in other places. So I did want to give you, I was going to ask you that question, but you went there. But let me just ask, I want to go to the audience in just a minute, but I want to also get down to another piece. When you hear someone like Amy, or I went to many of these launch competitions, what are the ingredients inside firms? And I know you and Jean, your wife, look not only at for business firms but also social entrepreneurship. What are the 5 characteristics you look at as being the benchmarks that you say, wow, that distinguishes that enterprise from something that's not quite there yet?
Answer first, the earlier point. I'm super passionate about this and the impact it can have, as hopefully you can tell. We absolutely believe this is one of the great investment opportunities of all time. You make money in investing by buying low and selling high. in these rise of the rest cities because all the venture capitalists are, I like your word, coagulating, and they're coagulating on the coast. It's harder for entrepreneurs in places like Des Moines to raise capital. As a result, the valuation of those companies are lower than if those same companies were in like Palo Alto or Boston or someplace else. But when they're successful, nobody, when the company goes public, says that like, oh, you're Exact Target. We went public in Indianapolis. Oh, you're in Indianapolis. Well, instead of being worth $2 billion, you're only worth $1 billion because we're going to give you a discount. Nobody says that. Nobody cares once the company breaks through, but it does matter in the early days. So our argument to venture capitalists is don't do this just because it's the right thing to do, although we think it is. It's actually the smart thing to do, to kind of be, kind of looking more broadly in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship. They're great companies that are great investment opportunities, and that's arbitrage at some point will close, hopefully sooner rather than later. Answer your other question. We look for obviously a bunch of things. It starts with the idea. Is it something interesting that solving a real problem that sort of like something worth a battle kind of worth fighting? Right. It's the entrepreneur, but also the team. We've seen lived that the entrepreneurship is a team sport. It's not about the founder, the CEO, exclusively. It's about the team.
What's that African proverb you always drop?
I love this. It's the African proverb, which just kind of defines what we're trying to do with Rise Dress. If you want to go quickly, you can go alone. But if you want to go far, you must go together, which is really the spirit of partnerships, and it takes longer and it's harder. Obviously, you can go faster if you go alone, but you're not going to get as far. You're not going to have as much impact. So having entrepreneurs that have that mentality, both the teams they build internally and the partnerships they forge externally, is something that is critical as well. And then sort of that sense of urgency and passion and stick-to-itiveness and perseverance, these startups are hard and many do fail, and you just kind of have to keep coming back and fighting. Elon Musk, obviously had success, done some weird things lately, but has had some considerable success with Tesla and SpaceX. Both of those companies almost failed, like inches. Difference between success and failure is inches. And so having entrepreneurs that really have that mentality, you're not going to give up. They're going to, there's some way, if there's like a barrier in front of them, a wall in front of them, either like go around the wall or climb over the wall or knock the wall down, but they never are going to be deterred.
Wow, well, great. Well, let me open up the floor. Questions, comments here. Yes, right here in the front. And did you have your hand up in the back too? Yep, so gentleman in the back.
Hi, my name is Eric Baker. I'm with Marcy's Law for Iowa. Thank you for being here in Des Moines. You brought up a bit of policy and some politics early on, and we're here in Des Moines, Iowa. This place is going to be crawling with presidential candidates any day now. And so I wanted to ask you, as we talk about this innovation economy, what kinds of questions should we be asking the 20-something presidential candidates that are going to be doing town halls probably right in this room here?
Great
question.
How should they be grilled?
How do you make sure that Iowa becomes a startup state where there's a momentum, and how do you extend it more broadly for the country? It's not about fighting the battle for the industries of the past. It's about creating the industries of the future. Even the internet, as I mentioned, when it's now a big industry. When we got started, nobody even thought it would work. And so what are the industries of tomorrow? How do you make sure you're positioned to do that, which is not just about venture capital and some of the things we're talking about, obviously education. How do we rethink our schools so we're actually teaching kids the things that machines can't do? And some of them are creativity and collaboration and some of the things that we've talked to. What are the policies, incentives, in terms of tax policy, other things that create incentives to invest so people are more willing to take the risk? What are ways to be more inclusive in terms of this innovation economy so everybody has an on-ramp if they have an idea, as opposed to as I talked about before. So there's a bunch of things that need to be done, and I would say that the data is also pretty compelling about venture capital outside this country. 20 years ago, overwhelmingly, over 80%, probably over 90% of venture capital globally was invested in the United States. Now it's less than half. China is on the rise, and some of these new areas like AI and robotics, they probably have the lead. So we've seen entrepreneurship globalize, and it's not just how do we step up our game, which leads to other issues like immigration, other things that get super complicated and sensitive and even emotional. But we have to continue to win what's now a global battle for talent.
Right.
If we don't do that, we are going to lose our edge as the most innovative nation. So it's like, how do you make sure that the country, the story of America and this rise of the last 250 years continues, as opposed to kind of we peaked and it can continue, but only if we really back these next generation of pioneers, innovators, the crazies that are imagining a different world and are willing to put everything on the line to try to create that new world. But we need to help them.
Great. Yes, sir, right in the back.
Mike DeSilva, WHO TV, Channel 13 News. You mentioned all the opportunity that comes with this digital technological revolution, this third wave. But in a world where you can self-checkout at McDonald's and Walmart and do your shopping on Amazon and you don't need brick and mortars, and you have driverless cars, and what are some of the negative consequences? What is this all going to mean for the American worker? Where are the jobs going to come from for people?
I think it's a big risk. It's a big risk. But this idea of technology disrupting jobs, destroying jobs, is not a new idea. I'll go back to farming, something you folks here understand. 200 years ago, over 90% of us worked on farms. Now it's less than 2%. Why? Because of technology. Technology allowed people to grow more food with less people. But 88% of people didn't move into unemployment. We were crafty enough as a country to then kind of pivot from that agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution. People moved from farms to factories. They had to get reskilled to be able to do those jobs, but that pivot happened. Now we have to pivot again around technology and some of these, these new industries. And we have to create some industries, some of which none of us today can even imagine, that are going to create millions of jobs. And I don't think we're going to do that if we're only backing a few entrepreneurs in a few places that all come, look the same. We're going to do that by backing entrepreneurs everywhere who aren't just coming up with ideas for companies, but ideas for big industry. And there are people I know who I respect who say this time it's different, and this time the destruction of jobs is unstoppable, and we don't see a path to create new jobs. Therefore, we have to have a discussion about a safety net and universal basic income and a bunch of things. And they might be right. They might be right. But let's don't assume that's the outcome. Let's try everything we possibly can to create as many jobs as good jobs in many places we possibly can, because I had the honor a couple of years ago meeting with the Pope at the Vatican, and he said something I'll never forget, which is that jobs are not just about income. Of course that's important, but it's also about purpose and dignity. So we can't just say, this time is different and, these jobs are going to be lost and 3 million truck drivers aren't going to be driving trucks anymore. We'd say, okay, what are the jobs of the future? What are the industries of the future? What are the skills necessary in the future? And how do we lead as a country to do that and bring people along?
Steve, just to wrap up, some of what you said is so powerful, but another thing just to share with this room that you may not know about Steve. Steve has been one of the most dedicated and hardworking truth tellers to both parties about startups and startup culture, the policy arena. And one of the biggest things you care about is immigration and talent, and the United States remaining the brain drain problem for the rest of the world. And I'm just interested, just because that's been a huge topic this morning, of just immigration, communities, inclusiveness. And I'm just wondering, given where we are at our national politics today, where this is such a hot topic, a third rail topic almost, how do you handicap it, and what kinds of messages are you still trying to get through to, say, the Trump administration on this?
Well, first of all, as Steve said, I try to stay out of politics. I try to just work with everybody and try to
You say the same thing to both sides.
move forward. I won't even attend a press conference when we work on the Jobs Act or the Startup Act unless they're Democrats and Republicans at the press conference. I believe that, I know I'm lonely in this, or alone in this, because most people don't, that, democracy requires compromise, and that requires actually working together, not just kind of like talking past each other. And so, I stay out of the political side. But the reason immigration is so important, and obviously there are many facets to it, and of course securing a border is important, and of course figuring out ways to deal with legal issues around people who came here illegally are important. But this country, I mentioned, we started as sort of the startup nation. In large part, our success is because of immigration. 40% of our Fortune 500 companies were started by an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. About 50% actually in some of the tech sectors. We don't want to build walls and push these people away. They'll just start those companies elsewhere. I mentioned in the book there's a company, Snapdeal, that started in Pennsylvania. The guy was here because he was at the university there, at Wharton, I think it was, and he wanted to stay but couldn't. He couldn't extend his visa, so he had to go back home. Happened to be from India, and that company now has like several thousand employees in India. And he wanted to be in Pennsylvania. We want to attract these people. We also, of course, need to make sure our kids are educated and have the right skills and can compete in this kind of this new economy. But this has become way too politicized and kind of way too complicated. And I understand that probably even people in this room I'm talking about are like, immigration. But if we don't figure out a way to continue to be welcoming of these people that are job makers, not job takers, we're going to not be positioned to kind of win in this next wave, and we'll rue the day. 50 years ago, when somebody's writing a postmortem, like, how did we lose our edge? This was like, Silicon Valley and the innovation culture in the United States it's like the entrepreneurial culture, the pioneering, anything is possible culture. Like we really had it, and now we've kind of lost our way. And the last point I'll make on this, just because it's a reminder of things can change. The first stop of our first Rise the Rest tour 5 years ago was Detroit. Here's the story of Detroit. 100 years ago, Detroit was Silicon Valley, the most innovative city in the country, probably the world. When the automobile was the hot technology of the day, people were moving to Detroit like crazy. Back then, by the way, 100 years ago, Silicon Valley was fruit orchards. Fruit! They weren't growing startups, they're growing fruit. So what happened? The last 100 years, Silicon Valley rose to prominence. Detroit lost 60% of its population in the last half century and then went bankrupt. And it was Silicon Valley. Because it wasn't focused on the future. It wasn't investing in the future. It was overly reliant on a industry and a few big companies in that industry, not on the startups related to that industry or another industry. It got cocky, it got complacent, global competition intensified, and it crushed. Now it's fighting its way back. We have a half a dozen investments in Detroit. What's happening, particularly in the downtown area, is really quite exciting. But it's a pretty vivid, I would say, sober reminder that these things can change, and our lead is not, guaranteed. And it's not just about immigration, which I define immigration as like this wonky policy thing. I define it more as how do you win the battle for talent?
Right.
How does Des Moines win the battle for talent in terms of keeping people here, getting people to move here, and how does this country win the battle for talent? Because capital follows talent, and you mix those two things together, and that's what's going to create the future.
Well, with that, I want to thank Steve Case, because Steve is the one who brought me here, and that has led to us. We did an event 2 days ago on health innovation in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We've done programs in St. Louis. Lots of. But I'm so proud we brought the Heartland Summit here to Des Moines. That was from Steve Case. So, ladies and gentlemen, Steve Case, Revolution, the third wave. Thank you so much.